Today's video is brought to you by a new sponsor, Ridge Wallet, helping men everywhere toss out that old, fat, uncomfortable back pocket wallet that belongs in the garbage anyway. Gentlemen, the 21st century is a glorious time where we have all kinds of world-changing technology, with entire houses powered by solar energy and jets that can get us around the world in just a few hours. But the biggest development of all is a slick, comfortable wallet that doesn't make it look like you've got a huge welt on your right butt cheek. This is the Ridge Wallet. It holds up to 12 cards plus room for cash, and look, unless you're Elon Musk, you don't need to carry around 12 cards. We got like 3 or 4 maybe, an ID card, health card, whatever, 12 though, that would be, it's a lot. In here, I've got a few bank cards, also got my ID, driver's license, health insurance card, everything that I need. Plus, on the back here, little pocket for cash. Just whip that out like that, peel off a bill, and then just throw it back in. And it's got these little rubber feet on the back so your cash doesn't go anywhere and get lost. Brilliant. There's over 30 different styles. This is the titanium one. This is actually the burnt titanium one. I'm not sure why I'm not using this one. It looks really cool. And oh, by the way, you just pop out the cards from the bottom. Like that. Easy does it. It also comes with RFID blocking technology that'll protect you from digital pickpockets, and a lifetime warranty, and also a 45-day test period backed by a full refund. Ridge Wallet is a great wallet. It is just better than, I threw out I did throw it out. It's still on my bedside table, but my old fat, really worn down leather wallet, it's been replaced. They got 40,000 5-star reviews. I like how sleek and non-bulky it is. It's just simple. It's the way to go. Also, Father's Day is coming up, right around the corner, so maybe you're thinking about what to get your dad. So, yeah, get them a Ridge Wallet. Get them to throw out that ugly leather wallet that's bulging and horrible from 1978. Just do it. Click the link in the description box below. Use the code BRAINFOOD at checkout to get 15% off the cost of a Ridge Wallet. Great product, great deal. Link below. And now today's video. A common idea about the ancient Romans is that they were a paragon of rationality in government, learning, and military organization. This idea primarily stems from Renaissance and Enlightenment era stereotypes about the Romans and the Greeks. But in reality, they did more than a few things that don't match up to that preconception. Most pertinent to the topic at hand today, the ancient Romans kept sacred chickens they let decide countless major events, helping to guide their civilization and ultimately shape human history. Yeah, we didn't misspeak. Chickens. So, how did one of humanity's most enduring and enlightened civilizations come to allow the thing you eat for dinner to decide their major ongoings in a legally binding way? Since the regal period of Rome, when Rome had a king, divination rituals were central to the Roman government and religion. Rome traces back many of its native divination rituals to its legendary founder Romulus. We don't know if Romulus actually existed, but the semi-legendary period he comes from explains why Romans looked to divination as an important function of the state. Romulus was one of the 7 legendary kings, and the earliest priesthood is built around the powers of those kings diffusing into the Senate and the priestly colleges. The Etruscans, Rome's northern neighbors, were considered experts in divination, and the last king of Rome, Tarquinius Superbus, was himself Etruscan. The Etruscan rule ultimately mingled their divination and religious rituals in with the Romans, and thus when Tarquinius was overthrown in 509 BCE, the Etruscan priests responsible for divination in the king's court were retained by the Senate. These were the haruspices, and they are distinct from the Roman divinatory priests, the augurs. As for the College of Priests, a college was marked by all the priests taking part in the same duties and rituals. The colleges were also embedded in the Senate and the ruling class. The Senate that ruled Rome during the Republican era was in turn recruited from the elites of Rome, or the Patricians. The Patricians came from a set number of families that continued to dominate Roman politics well into the imperial era. We know based on surviving lists of priests that they were almost always drawn from serving senators, especially in the colleges. It's also important to note that priests in Rome were not professional priests, in the sense that they almost always had other jobs, usually, as alluded to, in politics as senators, but also in the military and business. It wasn't until the 4th century BCE that the colleges began to recruit prospects from the plebeian class, and even then they were from the elite end of the plebs. So, why did they choose chickens to shape the world? Well, in a word, Jupiter. Jupiter was worshipped as the chief deity in the regal era. Romulus was considered to be the first augur, and augurs read signs for Jupiter's support called an auspice, hence our modern word auspicious, meaning conducive to success or a sign of future success. Since Jupiter was associated with thunder and the skies, a good indication of his will was in the flight of birds. Thus, augurs like Romulus and his descendants watched for things like where and how birds flew in the skies. These rituals were held by the kings and later the Senate to understand Jupiter's will when it came to important decisions. As for the nuts and bolts of it, the birds flew within a space outlined in the sky and the ground by the augurs who would delineate what space was sacred and the boundaries of the city. They also designated temples and other sacred spaces, and as a brief aside, it's from that duty we get our word for inauguration. In any event, whether it was reading bird signs or delineating sacred spaces, an auspice is a sign with a permanent effect. The observation of an augur was binding, as it was considered a direct form of communication from Jupiter. As you might have guessed from all of this, a position as an augur set one up to have a rather good and powerful life. So this all brings us to the chickens. As birds, chickens were also considered messengers of Jupiter. Now, you might be wondering, most birds can fly up into the sky, so it makes sense for birds to be messengers of a sky god. But why chickens, who, while they can fly on an extremely limited basis, or maybe more aptly leap into the air with style, soaring into the sky isn't exactly within their natural capability? Well, first, it is true that even in Republican times, chickens were still as relatively flightless as they are now. So, we don't know with hard evidence why chickens in particular were used, though various hypotheses have been put into place. Most prominently, we have the simple fact that chickens are a little easier to keep and maintain than other birds who might need their wings clipped or the like to get them to stick around. Thus, using chickens may have simply been a practical measure despite their relatively flightless nature, making them seemingly less in tune with the thunder god than their high-soaring brethren. Whatever the case, we know the chickens were raised in temples by the augurs. Of course, you may now be spotting the issue of if the way the birds flew and that sort of thing was how they divined Jupiter's will, well, how did chickens help here? While they didn't fly, the augurs had a way to divine Jupiter's will through them. They fed the chickens, and based on how they ate, a sign can be read. This ritual, which technically could have used any bird, is called Tripodium, and it is surprisingly important throughout the Republican era. As to how it worked, in an oversimplified nutshell, if the chicken ate and dropped its feed while eating, it was a good sign in support of the thing. If a sacred chicken refused to eat, it was considered an ill omen. At first, the ritual was supposed to be divinatory in the sense that it could read the future. This is attested to in the works of later Republican writers like Cicero, one of our main sources for the duties of augurs and the sacred chickens. By his time, the ritual was used to seek the approval of Jupiter for an action, at least according to Cicero. As alluded to, the sign as an auspice became binding as Jupiter's will became known to the augur. Given the binding nature of things, it is perhaps not surprising that augurs were not permitted to perform a tripodium without a magistrate's authorization. A magistrate was an elected official from the patrician class, and only they could call on these rituals. This can happen at home with the Senate during a military campaign, or even on warships, as one story we'll delve into shortly will discuss. It's also worth noting here that according to Cicero, most magistrates were either augurs or attended so many Senate sessions that augury was intimately familiar to them. Even if its magistrate was never an augur, he had enough knowledge of the practice to know what he was doing. As for the ritual itself, the augurs carried out the rituals, but they were assisted by Polari, or literally, the chicken men. Chicken men were the plebeians who actually took care of the chickens, fed them as part of the ritual, and helped the augur recognize signs. It seems that at first they were always taken up by other augurs, but somewhere in the transition from early to late Republic, the augurs, no doubt getting tired of taking care of pooping smelly birds, left a lot of their duties to plebeians, who became the chicken men. Despite being plebeians, the chicken men held some power in the ritual, such as being able to call out a sign to be interpreted by the augur, a small but important power, given that Rome's religious rituals required perfect execution to count. A successful ritual, whether it be bird watching or the Tripodium, required no interferences or other omens. These interferences or unexpected happenings during a ritual are called vitium, which can be as simple as the attending chicken man letting out a fart or a lightning bolt coming out of nowhere. If no vitium interrupts the augur's ritual, the auspices can be taken and become binding. To further illustrate the plebeian chicken men's power, the chicken men were occasionally occasionally accused of controlling parts of the rituals to manufacture Jupiter's will. For example, Cicero accused the chicken men of deliberately ignoring certain signs by simply not looking at the birds if they felt they were acting a certain way. They also were sometimes accused of purposefully starving the sacred chickens so as to get a positive outcome, as when the chickens eat enthusiastically, they are more likely to drop their food, which is auspicious. Because of the fact that the entire system is more or less hinged on how hungry the chickens were, Cicero, who himself was an augur for about a decade between 52 to 43 BCE, went as far as to say real divination, as in seeing the future, had already died out in Rome by this time. Nevertheless, during his time in the late Republic, there was a boom of divination manuals and other aids for augurs, but very little of that literature survives except for Cicero's writings. Of course, Cicero is known to have taken great pride in his position as an augur despite these complaints, and very much had his own agenda when it came to divination and the role of an augur. Like most things about ancient Rome, we either rely on an incomplete source or a very biased one. Just like the starving sacred chickens, we take what we can get. As an example of the shenanigans that could take place in these rituals, we have 293 BCE's Battle of Aquilonia. Consul L. Papirius Cursor wanted to engage the enemy based on a positive Tripodium ritual. His chicken man, being overzealous in pleasing the consul, reported an auspice despite the sacred chickens refusing to eat. Papirius went on to announce the auspice until his other chicken men reported their misgivings. They saw their fellow chicken man's lie as extremely grave, a major offense. Demonstrating the lowly standing of the chicken men in society, they didn't report the matter directly to the consul but to his nephew. The nephew got the credit for stopping the ruse rather than the chicken men. As punishment, the consul placed the offending chicken man in the front lines of the coming battle, where he was immediately impaled by a javelin, which was ultimately deemed a divine punishment for misrepresenting the god's will. Of course, sometimes it wasn't the lowly chicken men ignoring the god conduit chickens, but the prominent men themselves. For example, in 249 BCE, at the Battle of Drepana, Publius Claudius Pulcher, commanding the Roman fleet at the time, made a grave mistake. Before attacking the Carthaginian fleet, he called for the Tripodium. The attack simply could not go on without the sacred chickens being consulted. The sacred chicken attendants thus took them out of their cages to feed them, but they wouldn't eat. If he had been a pious Roman, Claudius Pulcher would have heeded the sacred chickens and not attacked. Instead, he doubled down on his mockery of the god's will. Upon hearing that the sacred chickens would not eat, he quipped, "They can drink instead," and made them fish food. He then attempted a sneak attack by night, but the Carthaginian fleet managed to in turn sneak around the Roman one and pin them against the shores, with the result being the Carthaginians' greatest naval victory of the entire war, almost completely decimating the Roman fleet. In the aftermath, for almost a decade, Rome didn't even bother trying to create a new fleet, and Publius Claudius Pulcher's act came to be a prominent example of what happens when you ignore the sacred chickens. And as for the man himself, his sacrilege and perceived treason ultimately saw him exiled, all because some chickens wouldn't eat in front of him that one time. Bonus fact. You might at this point be wondering how they decided what chickens were sacred. Well, we really don't know. Well, we don't know if chickens are hatched into sacredness or had sacredness hatched onto them later. We do know that the Romans had no problem eating poultry and their uterine excretions. We know, for example, that Romans ate omelets and ate chickens in a variety of ways, including stuffed. There was even a law passed in 161 BCE to limit poultry consumption to 1 chicken per meal. The Romans were also always trying to find ways to better fatten their chickens by things like modifying their food or castrating roosters. So while we don't know how they picked the sacred chickens, we do know, at least, that not all chickens were sacred.
Now, just before you leave today, maybe you're looking for something else to watch, why not check out my new channel called Warographics? Want to know all of the details about some of history's most famous battles and wars? Come join me on Warographics, from Sherman's March to the Sea to Operation Barbarossa. If it's got people fighting each other, or occasionally animals, we will cover it. There is a link below.